Hey guys, welcome to this Antique with me. So today we're going to be doing the Charge of the Light Brigade, and this is going to be an in-depth analysis and interpretations of the poem. As always, there will be a shorter version uploaded later this week, so if you're in a rush, head over there. If not, we're going to jump straight in. Okay, so The Charge of the Light Brigade was written by Alfred Tennyson, and a super rough overview is that this poem explores a battle during the Crimean War between British and Russian forces. Due to miscommunication, the British soldiers rode to their death. So ultimately, this poem really focuses on the loyalty of the soldiers and the bravery that they had, because they noticed that something was kind of wrong because the Light Brigade was actually equipped to fight big battles. However, Tennyson is really trying to portray their patriotism and also the obedience as soldiers, and really try to ingrain this kind of image of them being quite honorable and noble. Okay, so in terms of the context, this was set during the Crimean War, which lasted between 1853 and 1856. There is also a major imbalance of weapons that we're going to notice in the poem. So the British troops, and we're seeing this from their perspective, they had sabers, which is basically like a sword, whereas the Russian troops had guns. So there's a major imbalance between the two forces. This is also used to kind of demonstrate their bravery even further, because even though they were so outgunned, they still continued to fight and they still led to noble deaths. As mentioned before, the Light Brigade were not actually equipped for a fight. They weren't really the battalion that was going to lead straight into a battle. So the fact that they were faced with one, it just again shows the bravery, and the fact that they didn't stand down from a fight, even though they went to a battalion that was specialized for it. It just shows again how noble they are, because what Tennyson aims to do is to really ingrain this kind of idea into our minds of how noble and brave they were, because it's written as a way to remember the Light Brigade. This links on to the next context point, which is that Lord Alfred Tennyson was actually asked to write about the sacrifice, and the soldiers were honoured for obeying the command even though a mistake was made. In terms of the structure, it's actually written as 6 stanzas, which are basically paragraphs in poetry, and they tell a story, and it's quite easy to distinguish the purpose of each one. So it really begins with us finding out who the Light Brigade were, what they did, like the fact that they're so noble, followed the commands, and then it kind of leads us into battle with them. So it's written as a third person, so Tennyson is telling us a story of what actually happened. There's also lots of repetition which you should really focus on, because it changes the structure as we go along, and the repetition is used to remind us of their bravery and their loyalty. So the themes in the poem are quite clear. So first of all, we see conflict, and we see conflict between men because of course it's based in a war. There's also a lot of religious imagery which is used, which is basically used to kind of exemplify like the actions and kind of make it seem more honorable. There's also a lot of patriotism, bravery, and sacrifice, and we see a lot of this through repetition. Because remember, Tennyson wrote this to make sure that the Light Brigade was remembered. Therefore, continuously kind of like speaking about these points and continuously bringing up these themes makes it a lot easier to remember in the reader's mind. Okay, so let's actually go on to the poem. If you haven't read it, take a moment, pause the screen, read it, and then we're going to jump straight in with the analysis. Okay, so let's jump into the first stanza. So immediately we're going to see a lot of repetition, which is what Tennyson uses to kind of reiterate the image that he's trying to portray. So first of all, look at the first 2 lines. Half a league, half a league, half a league onwards. So a league is actually a unit of measurement, and what he's doing is that he's talking about the actual brigade travelling. So these 2 lines create like a steady rhythm which kind of imitates a horse's hooves. So we kind of like jump straight in and we have this kind of smooth kind of transition into the poem. However, the poem almost immediately takes a very sinister turn with Valley of Death. So, Valley of Death is actually a religious and a biblical reference. And look at the idea of death. So, there's obviously negative connotations. It's almost foreshadowing what's coming. So, it's a Valley of Death where we know like nothing positive is going to come out of this. And it has this negative symbolism kind of tells us what's ahead for these soldiers. This is then reiterated with charge for the guns, and this is a command that was given. So imagine like someone telling you to run towards the guns. Like it would be a terrifying moment. But the fact that the soldiers did so, then they did it obediently and without question, again shows the obedience as soldiers, but also like the brave that they had. The fact that they saw guns, but that didn't deter them from their mission. They leapt towards it. Finally, look at how the first stanza ends. Look at rode the 600. So this is actually really important because already, like at the end of the first stanza, we've seen it twice. But one thing you need to notice is that every single stanza in the poem, all six, end in that same way or a very similar way. And as it kind of goes on, we're going to see how this changes. So right now, we're with the 600. We're riding with the 600, like the whole entire brigade is together. But that's going to quickly change. That's something you need to keep an eye out, and we're going to go through it together. Okay, so immediately in the first stanza, what we've seen is that we've been introduced to the brigade, and we know that they're brave, and we know they're charging for their guns, and we know that all 600 are together at that point. Okay, so then in stanza 2, it changes because we realise that the command that they're about to follow, someone's made a mistake. And this is shown when someone had blundered. So even though the command may have been wrong, and like, you know, you can almost suggest that the soldiers would know because, you know, they're a light brigade, they're not really equipped for fighting, but they've been told to charge with their guns and they've been given this command. So we can almost suggest that they may have known that something was wrong. But what's important is how the soldiers reacted, which again demonstrates the bravery which Tennyson is trying to portray. The way that they react to such a command, you know, speaks volumes about them as soldiers, as them as people, as them as almost British, because, you know, we're trying to really increase this idea like patriotism and, you know, the fact that they, you know, fought for the country and they died for their country. This is again shown with a repetition. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs not to bid do and die. So this ultimately demonstrates the role of the soldiers, and, you know, it suggests that it's not their place to question or to go against a command. You know, they receive something and it's not their place to, you know, fight against it or to like, question it, but instead it's their place to basically obey. So what Tennyson is doing is Tennyson is kind of portraying the obedience and the discipline held by the soldiers and really complimenting them for the bravery and the fact that they, even though they might have known something was wrong, the fact that they continued and the fact that they had belief in their countrymen to do that. So Tennyson again finishes the second stanza with "Into the valley of death roar the 600." So again, he's using repetition here to kind of reiterate the fact that the soldiers are riding towards their death, that the soldiers are riding towards their end, and there's 600 of them. You know, there's such a big focus on this number throughout the entire stanza, and it kind of, you know, helps us remember who they were, how many of them there were, and ensures that their living, you know, memory is passed on. So it's in stanza 3 that we really begin to understand exactly how outnumbered and how outpowered they are. And it begins with the first 3 lines: cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, and cannon in front of them. So what this does is that it uses repetition to kind of show us the severity of the situation that they entered, and also to show that they're completely surrounded. You know, there's cannons right, left, and in front. So the only place that they don't have it is back. But they're not going to retreat. They're going to carry on. They're going to go forward and they're going to continue fighting, which again kind of reiterates the fact that, you know, they're so brave, you know, they're powerful soldiers, that even though they're outnumbered, even though they only have sabers, they're still going to fight for their country. This image is kind of further reiterated with "stormed out with shot and shell." So what this does is that it uses sibilance, which is basically alliteration with like the letter S, and what this does, it creates this kind of sinister tone as you read about how they were attacked. These small kind of techniques, so what they do is that they create this ambiance that we can, you know, try to feel, because we gotta remember that this was written in third person, and Tennyson wants us to experience this like a story. So little things like sibilance, so it, you know, creates this kind of tense atmosphere and creates an even more sinister tone. Okay, so even though we know that they're surrounded, you know, we're told that they fight, and this is shown through the word boldly. So boldly is an adverb which tells us how brave they are, and the technique that Tennyson uses here is diction. So diction basically means like the vocabulary a poet can use to have a certain effect, and, you know, by saying that, Tennyson is really trying to, you know, ingrain in us like exactly how the soldiers reacted and why they were so brave and why they almost deserve to be remembered. Because remember, he was asked to write about this, he was asked to, you know, kind of ensure that their memory lived on, and he wants to do it in the, you know, the most positive manner. He wants to really try to help us understand exactly what the soldiers were like and really remember them in a positive light, which is why he uses repetition so much, which is why he uses certain words here and there, and we're going to see more of that in the next few stanzas. Definitely see a lot of more of their bravery in stanza 4, and we begin with flashed all the sabers bare. Now remember, sabers are swords, and these guys are up against guns and cannons. So even though they were surrounded, and even though they're so outgunned, like what they're doing is that he's trying to show that they continue to fight. And this kind of imagery, like with the swords, while the enemies had guns and cannons, again reiterates the bravery. Like even though there was such a power imbalance, they continued and they were brave enough to carry on. And what this does, it symbolizes the bravery as they continue to fight. This is also used with the verb plunged in. So think about the connotation. It's kind of like thrown in, because they have been thrown into the deep end. Like they weren't expected to to have a battle like this. But the fact that they plunged in but continue to go in with like the fist held high, it again shows exactly how brave they were. Okay, so there's a very brief mention of Cossack and Russians, and basically what this means is that the enemy is being fought during the Crimean War. This is one of the terms that they kind of throw in, and you kind of get kind of confused. But if you understand it, it kind of links back to the Crimean War, and it puts everything into context. For example, if I hadn't told you that this was based in the Crimean War, you might be confused about why the Russians are here too. Okay, so make sure you can kind of keep an eye out for any of these like small little terms that kind of help bring the context situation, especially if you're reading poetry in a way that's outside the classroom, because these kind of things will help you understand it in a much greater detail and appreciate it more. Okay, so basically we're in the middle of the fight now, and we know that the British soldiers are trying to fight. But look at the use of the words shattered and sundered. So the sibilants here kind of demonstrate the state of the British Brigade as they continue to fight. So we know that they're outgunned, but we know they're putting up the fight. But right now it's getting to the point where they're shattered. Like there's only so much they can do, and they've been fighting for so long. Ultimately, what happens is that they ride back, but not the 600. So look at the use of repetition here. So the repetition here kind of changes. So this is where the structure changes a lot, because it's the first time that the stanza doesn't end in draw the 600. And this is stanza 4, so we're already halfway through the poem. So the fact that it says not the 600, and this is the first change of repetition, and it changes the structure, and it shows that basically some of the soldiers have been lost, some of the troops have died. And this is quite like a major structural change, because as a reader you get quite used to it finishing in a certain way. You get used to being reminded of the 600, but now at stanza 4, at this point after the battle, it's not 600 anymore. We find out more exactly about how they went down in the stanza 5. So again, look at the use of repetition here again. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them. So what this was, even though it's very similar to stanza 3, what it's doing, it kind of emphasizes how outpowered they are. But also look at the cannon behind them. They're retreating now. So like they've given it their best shot. They've lost so many men. They've gone in and they've fought, even though they were so outpowered. So now what they're doing is that they're retreating, so cannon behind them. So in front of them is nothing, and that's the direction that they're going. So they're kind of escaping now. However, even while they're escaping, even while they're retreating, you still have this really, important imagery that's kind of portrayed. And this is shown with horse and hero fell. So the use of alliteration here kind of emphasizes the bravery and how they should be admired. So horse and hero, so it kind of, remembers like all the animals that were lost in the war. And even though they're retreating, even though they've given it their best shot, as they're also escaping, people are still dying. This kind of bravery and this kind of like the idea of them escaping is again shown through the lines came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. So look at the use of came through and back. So it kind of uses diction to kind of almost suggest that they did the impossible. So Tennyson uses this as a tool to make us admire them more. The fact that they were into death, they were into the mouth of hell, and they escaped. Like this kind of contrast, what it does, it kind of really helps us reiterate the exact bravery of them. So it's almost like as if it was a story. So in the beginning, like, they were going through the jaws of death, they were going to the mouth of hell, and there's almost like a finality to it that existed, because, we didn't think that they would return, but the fact is, they went in, they fought, they retreated, and now they're coming back. They've done the impossible. They've come back from death. They've come back from hell. However, even though it was, very brave of them, even though like they did the impossible, there's almost a very like somber tone at the end of the 5th stanza, as he writes left of 600. So what this means is that I was left of the brigade, because not all 600 survived. So whoever was left were the ones who came back from the jaws of death, from the mouth of hell. So even though, we can say that they're so brave, we can say that they're so honourable, it's still quite saddening to remember that not everybody survived this, not everybody was as fortunate as to, leave. So stanzas 1 to 5 basically, tells us the story of the brigade. So it kind of helps us follow along with them receiving the command, with them realizing that they're outnumbered, with them fighting, and then eventually, retreating, even though not all of them survived. But stanza 6 is a little bit different. Stanza 6 is almost as if Tennyson is speaking to us himself. So first of all, look at the freeze to the first line. When can their glory fade? So what this is a rhetorical question, and this is the Tennyson, challenging us. So like, he wants to imply that they shouldn't be forgotten. So he's almost like, saying, when will you forget these people? And he's basically kind of reiterating the fact that they need to remember that, that their bravery and their sacrifice, their obedience, the patriotism, needs to be remembered. So it's almost like, when are you gonna let them fade? Like, when are you gonna forget them? So by asking this, it's so powerful because it's something that nobody really wants to forget. So it kind of, as a reader, reiterates the fact that they're in charge of almost carrying on this legacy and remembering them, and kind of shifts the accountability further. So Tennyson is really strong in his views in terms of like them having to be remembered, and this is shown with honor the charge they made. So also look at the use of exclamation mark here. What this does is that it kind of changes the tone because it commands us to honor them, and it commands us to remember them. Almost as how they were obedient to the command that they received from the generals. We need to do our part, and we need to remember who they were. And then ultimately the poem changes with Noble 600. So this is kind of ends with a note that the reader can take away. So he wants us to remember how noble they were. And by finishing off the poem like this, it's kind of the last thing that the reader actually reads. And therefore it's almost like the last thing that they will remember. So even though Tennyson has, tried to, portray the idea and the image that these soldiers are so noble, by ending it like this, it kind of like ties it all in together very, very nicely. Okay guys, so that was the charge of the Light Brigade. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. We really explored like how Tennyson aims to continue this idea, this kind of memory of the Light Brigade, and we really looked at the techniques that he used to reiterate this, and some of them were like repetition, some of them were tone, some of them were alliteration, sibilance especially. So I think we're going to leave it there for today. Feel free to pause the screen, really catch up on my annotations, make sure that your notes are up to date as well. And yeah, if you guys have any interpretations, any alternative ones, please leave them in the comments so we can all learn from each other. As always, there will be a shorter version of this uploaded later this week, so it's going to be like a 5-minute revision, and what this is basically going to cover is like key quotes and a really, really quick analysis. So it's great for like to topic up your revision or like your last minute cramming. So if you're interested, make sure you subscribe so you'll get notification when it comes up. And yeah, I'll speak to you guys soon.